Hi, I'm Eric. This is the Longbox Review comic book podcast, and welcome to a conversation with podcaster Sean Ross. Sean is currently examining the George Perez-helmed Wonder Woman series on the Peace Bound and Down, a Wonder Woman podcast, along with some amazing guest hosts. Sean has also co-hosted some other wonderful podcasts that I've listened to over the years, such as Secret Wars and Beyond with, and correct me, Sean, if I'm wrong, after I get done with this, Dr. G and Greg, Squadron Supreme Cast with Greg, Never Ending Reading Pile with Greg, and others on the Pulp to Pixel network. Sean also was co-host of the Bat Pod with Bill Beer. And you've been a guest on a plethora of other podcasts that I've listened to over the years, some of which are A World on Fire, Fan Film Fridays. I just listened to one of those recently. And more recently, a bunch of Fire and Water Network podcasts. We will talk about all that and more. So hello and welcome, Sean.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I am really excited to get to talk to you. We've known each other like in the 21st century term. Like we've been, like online friends for years, and so this is the first time we've had a chance to connect, and I'm just really excited and very thankful for you having me on the show.
Well, I'm so happy to have you here. I have long been a fan of your work. We were talking about this before the record button was hit, but because I was trying to remember how I was introduced to you, and you mentioned something about a DC OCD episode in which you appeared on an episode with Peter Rios, and that was probably it. I don't know how many years ago that was. Do you remember what the topic of that episode was?
Oh, I do, because Paul Hicks, the host of the show, still gives me grief about it. It was covering Heroes in Crisis by Tom King and Clay Mann.
Yes.
Yes, and I am I notoriously, in our small little awesome podcasting comic book community, I'm sort of notoriously a Tom King apologist, and I fully understand all the varying emotions. People have big feelings about his work. I happen to really love his work. And I showed that love on that show to the point where even from Australia, I could see Paul Hicks sighing at me. So, yeah, that was probably it. Because that was a pretty fun episode.
Now that you mention it, yeah, I remember now thinking, oh, somebody else out there likes Tom King, like I do.
It's just the two of us.
Yes. Okay. All right. So, yeah. And then, of course, after that, I was like, I got to hear more of what Sean has to say. So I was, Googling you and found out about the other Pulp to Pixel episodes that you do. And those have been a delight. But I have a bone to pick with you. Because of the great coverage you've done on the Squadron Supreme. I now feel like I cannot cover that series.
Oh. That's not true. I'm a big believer in everybody can cover everything. The comics are so great that can be covered more than once, but I appreciate that. That was such a fun show. My buddy Greg Arujo and I covered the Squadron Supreme is his favorite comic book of all time, and he has read it every year since it came out in '85. But I had never read it, and I had a funny history with it where I knew I had never read it, and I knew it was this important work. So when I was in dollar bins, when I was doing bin dives, anytime I'd see a Squadron Supreme issue, I would grab it, assuming I didn't own it. And I still assumed I didn't own the whole series when Greg brought up, hey, I'd love to do Squadron Supreme. And I'm like, well, let me jump into my long boxes and check. And I ended up having like 5 copies of every. I had a ridiculous number of issues, and I did have 1 through 12, luckily. And so we did cover that show with me reading the issues for the first time, and Greg being sort of the seasoned veteran with it. And that show was a ton of fun to cover. That book is amazing. I would love for you to cover that book. I love getting to hear other people's views on comics that I love, and especially comics that I've discussed before. So please do cover it, because it's great. And if you do, and if you're looking for a guest on an episode, please let me throw my name in the hat early.
Well, I thank you. I would love to do that. Yeah, maybe in where are we at? 2030, I might get to that. But it has long been on my my wish list to cover. And I just want to say the work you have done, like covering like Secret Wars. I've not listened to all the episodes. Like I skipped Secret Wars 2.
Smart, good choice.
but
I wish I had done the same.
But I plan to get back to that at some point. But the third Secret Wars, I mean, that is such a good series, and you guys just really dove deep in that, and it really enriched my reading experience of the series, even though I hadn't read it in years. But going back and listening to you guys talk about the series in the way that you did, it was like, oh my gosh, just anytime someone that I encounter can talk eloquently and learnedly about a comic book instead of just like, I like the art, or, the story was okay, I give it an 8.3 or whatever, whatever, that's fine. But I really like when people dig into themes and analyzing characters and stuff like that and making connections. My Legion Project podcast partner, Peter Rios, does that so well. And I think you do that pretty well too.
Thank you. Yeah, and I appreciate that. First of all, thank you. And covering Secret Wars, it's really funny because Dr. G and I covered Secret Wars Volume 1, and that was a blast. That's a silly series that we all loved and grew up on. And literally all of Wolverine's dialogue ends in exclamation marks. I mean, there's all these fun little goofy things about it. But everybody loves it, even though if you read it, it's not necessarily the greatest comic book ever written. It's still a blast. Secret Wars 2 is the worst comic book ever written. I mean, it's literally Jim Shooter chronicling his midlife crisis, but it is such a phenomenal artifact of the time because the tie-ins to Secret Wars 2 are some of the best comic books ever done. I mean, it's Claremont on X-Men, Byrne on Fantastic Four, Mignola and Mantlo on Alpha Flight. It's really the tie-ins are just this beautiful encapsulation of the Marvel Universe in like 1986, 87. And so while the actual series is the worst thing I've ever read or covered, and we did dive into it. In fact, Greg Araujo and I had this sick, twisted contest of sort of who could find the most esoteric facts about the issue. I mean, at one point, there's a character in one of the issues who's clearly based on somebody Jim Shooter knows. And Greg and I both tried to track him down on LinkedIn. Like, we literally were like, this has got to be a real guy. Let's look and see if we could find him. I mean, it was a psychosis. It was not healthy for either of us. But some of the most fun I've ever had podcasting about some of the worst comic books ever made. But Secret Wars 3, God, that lead up between Avengers and New Avengers, that Hickman, 2010 to 2015, I think they're the greatest comics of the 21st century. I think Hickman is, probably the best writer of the 21st century. And it's just unassailable how amazing that New Avengers book was. And then leading up to Secret Wars 3. And so I appreciate you saying that because I love it. And I'm actually glad you mentioned the Legion Project because I am addicted to that show. I told you before we started recording that I was a little bit nervous to record with you because I've been listening to you for so long and because I love you, the work that you do, you and Peter, and I'm a diehard Legion guy. And so I love the Legion Project. And when I discovered that show, I came in a little bit late. You guys were doing the Baxter series and you were doing, I think it's the karate. I was really late. Because it's the new membership drive. It's the start of the Censor Girl arc.
Right.
And I remember finding the episode and going, and I had listened to other things before, but I for some reason had missed that show. And I looked at the episode and I went, oh my God, are they going to talk for 2 hours and 45 minutes about Censor Girl? Because I'm in. Like, I am so the target audience for this. And so I love that show. And I am absolutely, literally your target audience. I eat up everything about the Legion, and you guys do an amazing job.
Okay. So I guess that's one thing I did not know about you is that you were huge into the Legion.
Oh yeah.
So that's great. Just so the listeners know, I had these basic questions for Sean, but I always treat those as as kind of springboards, and so I want to go where the conversation leads us. And so, since you've mentioned this, so what is your Legion? Where did you start with that?
So I'm going to be really boring here because I think my Legion is most people's Legions. I actually got into the Legion late relative to most folks. I started collecting comic books in 1983. My first comic book ever is G.I. Joe 10. It's a nice little town called Springfield. And I got into G.I. Joe because of the commercials. I mean, Marvel and you know, Hasbro were brilliant. Saw the commercials, grabbed the comics. I had bought scattered comics here and there before then as a kid, but this was my first, like, oh, I'm collecting, like I'm buying this. And so, you know, I started collecting. I was mostly a Marvel guy, then started mapping out to DC. But I really jumped into the Legion with the death of Karate Kid. It's, you know, that whole opening arc to that Baxter series just, I mean, it still is imprinted on me, actually. Like, interestingly, he is still one of my favorite characters of all time, yet I have very little history with him, right? Like, I've gone back and read his, you know, series from the 70s, and I've read all the different iterations of Karate Kid in the various iterations of Legion that have come since, and I've liked many of them. But Val Armour, like that character, you know, I didn't have as much history with. It's outsized to my love for him, but his death is so pronounced, and it was one of the first deaths I encountered in comics as a kid. And it was so pronounced, and it was so powerful that it just imprinted on me. And then same thing with Lightning Lass. Like, I like Ayla Rands is my favorite character in the Legion because of that arc of her kind of rediscovering her power. Absolutely love that story. So I am definitely a Levitz, Giffen, Lytle, LaRoque sort of, you know, Legion guy. I love the Baxter series. I've gone back and collected the entire Levitz run, you know, and I love his work, and I love, you know, the Great Darkness Saga, everything leading up to it. I've read all of it now, you know, up to present day. I mean, and I mean literally to present day. Like, I bought Legion Lost, man. Like, I have a problem. Like, I seriously have a problem. Like, I think it was just me and Tom DeFalco by the end there buying that book. And I'm not saying I enjoyed it, but I'm something of a Legion completist. And so, yeah, I live for that Baxter series. And as of this recording, you know, Mark Waid just made an announcement that the Legion is returning. And, you know, he didn't say he's writing it, unfortunately, because I love Mark Waid, but he did say the Legion is returning, and he said, and it's returning in a form everybody will be happy with, which to me says Levitz era Legion.
Yeah, that's what I figure as well. But yeah, just having the Legion back. Well, and I just read at the time of this recording, I just read the Summer of Superman special, where Superboy is back, and he mentions the Legion, and it's like, oh, they're bringing all that stuff back. Well, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited for it. And the funny thing is I don't actually mind writ large. I wish there had not been all of these revamps, right? Because it's weakened the property. It's made it really hard for people to narrow it down. So I wish it had just been the Levitz Legion kind of uninterrupted. But I love 5 years later. And the Archie Legion is some of my favorite Legion books of all time. And I don't love the Wade Kitson Legion as much as the others, but there's some stuff in there that I think is really good. I even liked some of the Bendis stuff, you know, and that's a pretty weak era, but I even liked some of that. So it's funny because I like the Legion in its many forms, but, you know, at my core, if you asked me, it's going to be Levitz and Giffen.
Mm-hmm. So since you've mentioned all this and your love of Karate Kid, how do you feel about Giffen hating the character and wanting to kill him off?
I mean, I think it's hilarious. I mean, in my mind, Karate Kid's like the drummer from Spinal Tap. Like, if Keith Giffen is near the book, he's going to blow up at some point, right? Like, he's not making it out alive. And so I do think it's funny, all the different times, you know, in 5 years later, that SW6 batch where they're trying to go back to sort of that 50s Legion. And then it's like, oh, off screen, Karate Kid died. I mean, it's just, the hatred of the character. But in hating the character, he helps give him one of the great deaths in comic book history. So, you know, it's one of those things where I appreciate your hatred of the character, Keith. And Giffen's legendary, but you inadvertently made him one of my favorites. So I do think it's funny, though. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So you said you've been reading comics since 83.
Yep.
83. So let's see, that's about 5 years after I started. So we are, I'm assuming, pretty close in age.
Yeah.
So what got you? Why did you start reading? You said it was the G.I. Joe comic, right?
Yeah, GI Joe. So GI Joe got me collecting. I would go. But it's interesting. I think it's interesting. But GI Joe got me collecting. But what's kept me as a collector is kind of something larger than that. So I grew up really poor, and I like to say I had an 80s movie of the week childhood. For people who are too old, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. But for people who are too old to remember, every Friday, like ABC, CBS, they would do these movies of the week. And it was always like, Jenny's dad drinks too much, or, Bobby's mom hits him, or, Jenny's mom does drugs. And so basically any of those movies of the week, with the exception of When a Stranger Calls. I never had anybody call from inside the house and try to kill me. With the exception of that one, which is still one of the great movies of the week of all time, I had all the kind of social things that you could face as a kid. And so because of that, because I was growing up, facing a lot of challenges, and in particular, had a pretty bad guy as a father, I was desperate for positive male role models. And I was really desperate for whatever it was in me that knew that I didn't want to be a kind of person I was witnessing, but I didn't know what kind of person I did want to be. And then I discovered that person in like Clark Kent and Bruce Wayne and, all of the Peter Parker. And I found this morality, and I found this, sort of philosophy of doing the right thing and doing good and, not being perfect. That's the thing I always loved about Marvel at that point. Like, you're not perfect. Peter Parker's never perfect, and he's going to make mistakes. But at the end of the day, the guy's trying. And if you keep trying, you're going to probably live a pretty good life. And so it's funny because that imprinted on me at a young age, and I became a collector. And, you talk to any comic book collector of an age, and they'll go, yeah, I started collecting around, 8 or 9. Then I dropped down in around 15 because I discovered girls. I never had that dropout period. I still discovered girls, but I never had that dropout period. And so I have this uninterrupted collection, going back to 83. I've also never sold a comic or unloaded a comic, no matter how bad. So I have basically a comic book store in my room, in my comic book room, and I have a very understanding wife.
You would have to.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's yeah. If I know one of these days, all those long boxes are going to fall on me, and I'm going to be on an episode of Hoarders. But
oh my gosh.
But it's funny because that through line of why I started collecting, why I kept collecting, and why I collect to this day has never changed. And I have this little mantra I say in my head all the time, which is comics never let me down. Like comics, there are good comics, there are bad comics, there are good ages, there are bad ages. But no matter what I was going through in life, no matter what I was facing, be it as a kid or as a teen or as an adult, comics were always there to like kind of catch me or give me something enjoyable, something I loved, remind me of what I loved. And so I just I'm so thankful for the medium. So thankful for like that influence in my life, which has kind of kept me afloat, really.
Wow. Okay. So I know that having listened to you over the years that we had some similarities. In fact, I kind of think of you as, the Earth 2 version of me a little bit.
I'll take that. I will totally take that.
Or maybe I'm the Earth 2 version of you.
No. I want to be Earth 2. I want to be Jay Garrick. I'll be Jay Garrick.
But, with me, it's a little similar. I got into comics shortly after my parents got divorced. And then I was devoid of that male presence, although I will say my father was not really present in my life before that.
Yeah.
I discovered comics in that crucial time period where I was like, who am I? What am I doing? What's going on? And my mom, bless her, she was working multiple jobs to support 3 kids by herself.
Me too. Three kids, single mom, same thing.
Yeah. And so she didn't have the bandwidth to attend to us, right? All of us for any length of time. And so I had a lot of free time on my hands when that summer I guess it was fall that I discovered comics. But, going into that next summer, it's like, I was watching my younger siblings at home, but there was not much I could do besides, watch TV. And there's only so much TV you can watch, right? But I had comics, and what you said. Say that again. What is it about comics? They don't let you down.
Comics never let me down.
Never let me down. And that's how I feel about it too.
Yeah.
It's like in fact, there's some personal stuff that I've been going through recently. And man, if comics don't help ground me and keep me sane, my wife does a lion's share of that, to be honest. But when it's just me, reading a comic just helps me get through it all, right?
Yeah.
And they always have. But also, like you, I never stopped. Now there was a period in the 90s when I was going to grad school where I couldn't afford much, so I was reading like 3 titles.
Yeah,
that was it. But I still bought and read and boxed my comics. I collected those comics throughout those years. So I just, like I said, it's the similarities to us, and we live half a country apart, or maybe a third of it. I don't know. But it's just like, it's so weird that some of us have had very similar stories. But I still love talking about that with people like you. So as you were growing up, like you said, you read G.I. Joe. I know you're a big Legion fan. What were some of those like early comic series or characters that you fell in love with?
Yeah, I vividly remember I was G.I. Joe, and then I would pick up Batman. I'd watch the Batman 66 on reruns, that show. And I mean, it's so funny for, like, I have a 15-year-old and she doesn't understand, like you say, like, oh, you can only watch so much TV. When we were young, you could only watch so much TV because in the middle of the day, if you were stuck watching Bold and the Beautiful and Days of Our Lives, if you were, or Donahue or something, the middle of the day was not programmed for us. Right.
Right.
And so it's funny because I knew the Batman 66 TV show from reruns. So I would pick up Batman issues, the Doug Mensch, like Gene Colan, Tom Mandrake, pre-Crisis era, which I love. It's still love, even though objectively there's some really clunky writing in there. They're great comics. But I watched Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. Mm-hmm. And so I was picking up Amazing Spider-Man, the Roger Stern, John Romita Jr., early Romita Jr. era. And Roger Stern is, to this day, one of my top 3 favorite comic book writers. I think he's the best Avengers run ever, one of the best Spider-Man runs ever, one of the best Legion runs ever, one of the best Superman runs ever, and one of the best Doctor Strange runs ever. But he doesn't really get the credit, he deserves. I love Stern. So I was a big Spider-Man guy, and then the X-Men showed up on Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. If you remember Thunderbird turning into a bear, right? Like they didn't get everything right. Wolverine was Australian, but it was still a great episode. And I immediately went to the convenience store up the street, and I looked and I saw an X-Men issue, and I bought it, and I was in. I was completely hooked. So, like for many of us, Claremont, the writing was so much deeper that he was doing. It was so much more layered. It was so much more soap opera, but it was like my first breakup is Peter and Kitty. Like that's the first breakup I've ever encountered, right? Like when he comes back from Secret Wars, and I still have major issues with that because he was effectively assaulted by an alien with green gas, and then the X-Men turn on him and are like, "You cheated on her," and it's like, how about a little sympathy for Colossus? I just, justice for Colossus. But but that issue where they break up on the grassy hill, I was a little kid, and that imprinted on me like, oh, this is what love is. This is what a breakup is. And so I was just so plugged into Spider-Man and X-Men. And, and like I'm sure for you, like for many of us, I was very much an outsider, right? Like I again, all the things that I was dealing with socially, and for other reasons, I've always felt like this sort of outsider. So to read this book about the ultimate outsiders, right? The X-Men and then Spider-Man, and to fall into their lives and see them as heroic and see them as noble and struggling. I mean, I just got hooked. And so I was a big Marvel kid, but I had a toe in DC pre-Crisis. I think pre-Crisis DC, those comics could have come out in any decade, and it like Pre-Crisis Superman and Wonder Woman feel like they're from the 50s to me, at the time especially. I've grown to love them now, but at the time I was like, these are old comics, they're boring. But I was, very into, weirdly, like All-Star Squadron, which literally was from a previous decade. But then I was in on DC in Crisis. So when that DC explosion happens in 86, 87, and it's like all of a sudden they've leapt to the forefront of ingenuity and creativity, and I was all in on that too. So yeah, it's just funny. It's I've always danced between the two companies. I collect some things from other companies too, but at heart I'm a Marvel and DC guy and always have been.
Yeah. Oh man, you mentioning that DC explosion in that mid '80s time frame. Because I was there before that.
Yeah,
because I actually started as getting Spider-Man comics. My 3 very first comics that I bought off a convenience store newsstand were Amazing Spider-Man 187, a Marvel Tales reprinting Amazing Spider-Man 121.
Oh wow. Oh God. So you're like, wait, where's Gwen Stacy?
Yeah, exactly. And then an Avengers, I think it's 177, the last part of the Korvac saga, right?
That's hilarious.
And so I was hooked after that. But then, and I've been doing these my comics history episodes where I'm examining every month starting in, September 78 and going through and discovering, okay, I got these issues off the shelf. I got these other issues later, right? So I'm just kind of tracking my history and what did I actually buy? Well, I had this, dim memory of things, and it quickly, within the first year, I quickly started buying a lot more DC.
Mm-hmm.
And, Superman, Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes. That was my first title that I was like, I need to buy all these. Of course, I couldn't buy all of them at the time because what you got at the newsstand, at the grocery store or the drugstore or whatever, that was
it. Yeah.
You took what you got. And so I missed a lot of those, but I quickly grew into the DC realm, or, moved into the DC realm. And then, and then when you get into 84, 85, 86, 87, it's like, oh my God, there's so much good stuff coming, to the point that eventually I want to do a like maybe a round robin episode where I talk about what was the greatest year of DC Comics.
86, 87, that pocket, I always laugh about, when you're young, I love that you do. I love that the show. I love that you're covering your collecting. It's actually spurred me to think about that quite a bit too. And I love those moments where you stop and you realize, wow, at the same time Captain Carrot and the Zoo Crew was on the stands, so was Alan Moore and Stephen Bissett's Swamp Thing.
Yeah.
And and so was Claremont X-Men at its X-Meniest, and so were Marvel Tales, and so was, it's so funny to think about that range of what was on the stands at the same time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, for me, pre-Crisis Superman, even though have come to love it since, it was very much an entry. It was an entry level book for kids. It was designed to be an entry level book,
mm-hmm.
and so there were a lot of like one and dones, and not a ton of deep characterization, and designed to be more sort of four colory, which again is awesome. But when I was a kid, I was like, well, wait a minute, there's that. Or I could watch Bruce Wayne and Nocturna and Catwoman and Julia Pennyworth have this love triangle, and Vicky Vale, or then I can jump over to and the Swamp Thing books scared me, but I still was drawn to them. I don't know if you had the same experience as a collector. I remember when New Mutants 17 to 18, when it went from Tom Mandrake and Bob McLeod doing the art to Bill Sienkiewicz and the Demon Bear saga.
Yeah.
I was afraid of those comics, but I still bought them and read them. But I was legitimately like really viscerally upset by them. I don't know. Did you have a similar, you were older, a little bit older, but did you have a similar experience when that turn came?
Oh yeah. And then you get these people like Sienkiewicz coming in and it's like, oh my God, this is horrible.
Yeah.
What were they thinking? And of course, a few years later, I'm like, oh, wait, I was just stupid. But yeah, there's been a lot of that. And in fact, some time ago, I actually did a look at some Kirby DC comics. And I've said this before on the show, but didn't really appreciate Kirby's art. And now I love it. I bought a bunch of the omnibuses that DC put out of Kirby's work. I can't wait to read more and discover how stupid I was for not appreciating such a great comic book artist.
I don't think it's our fault. I think it's the era, because I was the same way. My first encounter with Jack Kirby were the Superpowers comics. Oh. And I was like, this is the worst art ever made. I was like, this is horrible. When I was a kid, I was like, this is like all square and blocky, and like everybody looks like they're chiseled out of stone. This is terrible. Same thing with Steve Ditko. I encountered Ditko on ROM, and I'm like, ugh, what is this? Like, this guy can barely draw a person. What is with these eyes? Like, this is crazy. You know, I see it on Speedball. I'm like, oh, this is the worst art ever. And then, you know, as you get older, you go back and look at them in their heyday, and you're like, oh my God, like I could stare at a Kirby drawing for a day and not, you know, see every line. And, you know, Ditko's this mad genius. And, you know, it is funny though, because I think I have that same moment with those creators, in particular Ditko and Kirby, where I'm like, oh, these guys are terrible. Or Carmine Infantino as well. Mm. You know, in my mind, in Carmine Infantino, everything he drew was some guy with his hands on his hips, you know, just standing. Like that's the Infantino pose. And I hated his Flash run. I hated his Barry Allen comics. Mm-hmm. And then I go back and look at his like 50s and 60s Love comics, and I'm like, this guy's amazing. He's like a top 5 comic book artist of all time. But you know, we just didn't know better. Like you said, we were at the whims of the spinner rack. And
yes, that is very true.
But also we were at the advent of really a third wave of artists. I mean, you know, you have the golden age, and there's some great things in there, like H.G. Peters, amazing in the golden age. And then you get, you know, kind of silver age, you know, Kurt Swan, Schaffenberger, kind of a that style. Then Neil Adams comes and disrupts everything, you know, and Kirby's in his, you know, crazy Kirby phase. But we really, you know, when we started collecting around the same time, I mean, that's when Byrne, Perez, Romita Jr., like the pillars of what we think of as comic book art, those guys were all coming up, and it was unbelievable. I mean, to think back and think, gosh, what an embarrassment of riches that in the same week I would buy 2 John Byrne drawn comics in Alpha Flight and Fantastic Four, and then Perez on Titans and Romita Jr. on, you know, maybe Iron Man and Spider-Man, and just it really is. That was such a golden age for those artists. And it's really nice that so many of them have kind of stuck around. Like, I know there's a lot of complaints about Romita Jr.'s current work, but we're very lucky that we still have him as an artist.
Yeah. So you mentioned on a podcast that I just listened to recently that Sandman was one of your very favorite comics. Is that still the case? Yeah.
And I mean, I obligatory separate art from artist comment here with all the stuff, unfortunately, that came out about Neil Gaiman. But I think, and you do have to separate the art from the artist, right? Because there were pencilers on that book and editors, and, you know, if you throw away everything, it's not fair to the rest of the creative team. But yeah, Sandman was a really important comic for me, like it was, I think, for many folks, because, you know, in finding comics at a young age, I was a voracious reader, and that leapt over to novels as well. So I would read a ton. I would read everything basically. And, you know, I'd find other kids who read prose like I did, who loved the Narnia Chronicles or Lord of the Rings or things like that. I didn't really have any friends who collected comic books for quite a while, but I knew some other kids who read prose like I did. And so to get to Sandman and to see the connection of those two worlds, to get that literary infusion into a book, and then also the trust that book had in its reader, like it really just said, hey, I'm going to throw really large concepts at you, and I'm going to make some pretty heavy allusions that, you know, you kind of need an English degree to understand sometimes. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to trust that you're going to go along with me and you're going to get them. And I absolutely love that book, and I loved that book. And I reread it probably once every like 5 years. And each time I reread it, there's some new pocket of it pops out at me where an issue or a part of a, a section of it, they hit all the like different sort of chapters of it, like Brief Lives and, the Kindly Ones, those things like that, those different arcs. And there's some arcs that I think about, I'm like, oh, that's not my favorite arc, or oh, I don't really love. And then I'll go back and reread it, and I'm like, oh my God, like, how did I not see, how brilliant this arc was? And so, yeah, I loved, and I still love Sandman. Again, separating art from artist, I still love that book. Were you a fan of it?
Oh yeah, in fact, when issue 1 was on the shelves at my local comic shop, I bought it and just went from there. And then of course, and the part of the reason I bring this up is like, when they finally brought in the Vertigo line.
Yeah.
And you're talking about the explosion of mid 80s DC. Well, then you have in the 90s, you have late 80s and into the 90s, you have Vertigo.
Yeah.
And that's where I was suddenly exposed to so many different stories, characters, approaches. And I was also at grad school.
Oh, perfect time.
I was pursuing an MFA, and I was being exposed to all sorts of different genres and types of things. And it was like, my mind was just expanding at an exponential rate at the stuff that I was experiencing. And it was, good or bad, or I shouldn't say good or bad, like or dislike. It didn't matter to me because it was all new material.
Yeah.
And I realized how sheltered I had been in not only my comic reading, but also my, the fiction that I would read. And I was the same way. Growing up, I would read pretty much anything that was put in front of me because I was just curious and wanting to be entertained. And
yeah.
And if I couldn't watch a science fiction show on television, which there wasn't a whole lot of.
Yeah, not at the time.
Bad. Yeah.
Well, and I was an English major, and so I think very similar experience where I read a ton of prose growing up, and like you, I was drawn to like fantasy and science fiction, right? So I was kind of in a specific lane, like comics. And then, in high school, you kind of read Gatsby and things like that, which I love. And, I did encounter other books. But when you get to college and all of a sudden they're putting this range of work in front of you that you didn't even know existed.
Yes.
And you get to spend, like, I still remember we spent 3 weeks on The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot on that one poem. And I know to some people that sounds like hell. It is 3 of my favorite weeks of my life. Like, that poem spoke to me and that poem felt like a puzzle box. And I remember the first time I read it, I was like, what? Like, I don't even, like, what are you, like, why is this considered great? I don't even understand what's going on. There's certain lines resonated, but I didn't get it. And then we started pulling it apart. And it was like getting this gift, like getting this, like, it's like Shakespeare for me. First time you encounter Shakespeare, you're like, what are they saying? And then when you really start speaking Shakespeare and getting Shakespeare, you're like, man, what, like, I'm so fortunate to live in a world where this exists. And it, picking it apart and taking it apart. And I remember that, and you're right, that was when so many of those works in comic books were hitting. And I love the run up to Vertigo almost more than Vertigo, because I love Morrison's Animal Man and Milligan's Shade and, Sandman and Doom Patrol and all those books. And not that there weren't amazing books in the Vertigo line, but the run up was so amazing because you didn't know where it was going.
Yeah.
You just knew that on the stands was this bizarre book by this, Grant Morrison, and is sharing space with Adventures of Superman, right? Which was also a wonderful book at the time. But it was mind-blowing, and it did really shape so much of, my consciousness. And I know in a large part, I became a teacher because of comic books, because I, like I said, I growing up really poor, my family and faced a lot of challenges, but I watched the kids in my neighborhood and cousins of mine go like pretty dark routes, right? Like, criminal routes, things like that. And I was not that person, but I was getting a lot of attention from school for being a really strong reader. And so I had this place I could go to every day where I was praised, where I was like recognized as having this strength. So I leaned into that strength. I mean, I certainly was never going to be a mathematician, but those weren't in the cards. It's not like I chose between the two. But because I was such a strong reader, it led me to being really drawn to creative writing classes and poetry classes, and then English major, and then eventually becoming an English teacher. And it really is because of all that groundwork that's laid by comics. I mean, I think for comic book collectors, we speak story as a second language, right? We understand story in a way that so many people don't, that haven't internalized it in their DNA. And it's one of the things that's so fun about podcasting with other comic book fans is, you say one, you mention, the start of Vertigo, and immediately I was about like, oh, who doesn't get enough credit? Karen Berger. And, like all of a sudden, like, we're talking about Sandman, and I'm thinking about the, Midsummer Night's Dream issue. And, then my 15-year-old is reading A Midsummer Night's Dream in high school right now. And I'm doing everything I can to convince her it's brilliant. And she's, kind of going along with me, but it's just so funny, that through line, right? And how literary comics made us, and how many stories and allusions we got that no one else would catch. And people would be like, wow, how did you know that Greek myth? And it's like, oh, because the Avengers fought the Greek gods,
Yes.
In 287, Roger Stern has them go to Olympus to save Hercules, and so, but it's, it's awesome. It really changed the course of my life.
Same exact thing. That was one of the things that I've always said about comics is that they educated me.
Oh yeah.
To, like when we, like you mentioned that you do a segment on the Greek gods or whatever, right, in school. And I was already pretty much familiar with them because I was introduced to them in comics. That got me curious. And so I pull out the encyclopedias and read about those things. And I had done that before the teacher introduced us to all this stuff. So yeah, and so many different concepts, what were sci-fi concepts, I guess still now, but things like multiple dimensions, and things all that's all that all came from comics for me.
Yeah,
and then when you encounter them elsewhere, of course I would try to hide that I learned about it.
Yeah, where that knowledge came from.
But because it wasn't, people would, as soon as you talk about comics, they would either their eyes would just kind of glass over, or they would just kind of move on. It was like this tainted source material or something. I don't know. And in fact, I can't remember if I don't know if you've encountered this as you've been on podcasts all these years. It's like, you tell these stories and you're like, did I talk about that already? But I'm gonna tell you, because I think you would appreciate it. Speaking of A Midsummer Night's Dream, that issue of Sandman, which I can't remember the issue number, maybe
I think it's 19.
So that came out, I think, around the same time I was in grad school, and I was taking a Shakespeare class from an instructor whom I had in undergrad. She had moved to the university around the same time that I did. And we were going through various Shakespeare plays. I don't remember if we actually discussed A Midsummer Night's Dream, but I bought an extra issue of that Sandman comic and gave it to her. I said,
That's awesome.
I think you would appreciate this. And I remember the look on her face when I handed it to her, when she saw it was a comic book. And my heart just fell.
Yeah.
Because it was that look of, what the hell is this? Okay, guess I'll take it. And then I never heard from her about it.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, that's terrible.
Isn't it?
Oh, God. I mean, she's probably thinking it's Classics Illustrated or something, right? And then she misses out on this amazing work of art. Oh, that's too bad. That's yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to this day, I want that damn issue back.
Yeah. You're like, hey, if you're not going to read it, let me have it. Yeah.
She probably just tossed it in the round file as far as...
Oh, God, I mean, that is awesome that you did that. And that sucks that she didn't read it, because oh, man.
You said your 15-year-old is, so they're going through Shakespeare's play.
Yeah. They're freshmen in high school, and they're reading Midsummer Night's Dream. And
that's amazing, first of all.
It is. And I have to control it, because if I like something too much, then immediately, they're not going to.
Right.
And so, I was an English teacher for years, and I taught Shakespeare almost every year of my career. And so I'm like, oh my God, it's so funny. And, Titania and then Bottom and then, then Puck is but is he a psycho or is he a comic character and, comedic relief? And so I had to kind of control myself, but I was able to help her access the language enough that now she's like, because the thing I always used to tell my students is, I'm like, Shakespeare isn't like any other writer. I'm like, Shakespeare gets 5 meanings for every word. Like everything Shakespeare writes has 5 layers of meaning. And we would actually like go through, because I would teach Hamlet, and we would go through and talk about like, hey, okay, there's this layer and what does it mean? And it was so funny because the kids would kind of fight me in the beginning. And then there's the point, it's the get thee to a nunnery moment in Hamlet. And they're all sophomores or juniors in high school. So they're going through their first big breakups. And all of them would immediately hook into the get thee to a nunnery. And I would have girls being like, Hamlet is such a jerk. And I'd have the guys being like, she's giving his stuff back. It's her fault. And like, I mean, literally like leaving my room, like fighting in the halls about Hamlet and Ophelia. And I remember other teachers being like, I had to break up an argument between 2 kids. And I was like, what is this about? It was about frickin' Hamlet and Ophelia. Like, what are you doing in your classroom? And so, I have this great love for Shakespeare and trying to pass that on to my kid, who I tried to pass on comics to, and I was unsuccessful-ish. So and I don't know if you have a similar experience, but I would kind of expose her to comics and I would show her comics, and she was really comfortable with graphic literature from a young age. And she liked like Raina Telgemeier, the Guts and Smile and those books, which are great. And she liked, certain graphic novels, but she never was really drawn to the superhero stuff. And then during the pandemic, she was in 4th grade when the pandemic hit.
Oh.
And like, I don't know, 40 days in, we had exhausted everything, right? We were like, there's nothing left to like she's bored and she's depressed and what do we do? And I was like, you know what? A lot of the people I talk to online, their kids are really into this thing called My Hero Academia. So we're going to start watching this show. And she like immediately latched on it. But I was like, I don't want her to just be TV. Like I knew manga. I collected manga as a kid. So I ordered, like the big, like first 8 books from My Hero. And she read them in like a day. And then I was like, oh, okay, cool. Here we go.
Wow.
So I started, and it was the pandemic. So you were just kind of, anything your kid was into that was keeping them afloat. So I was buying her manga and then I was showing her like, Robotech and stuff that I watched as a kid. And then now all these years later, my version of a comic book room, hers is the manga room. I mean, and it is literally like a library of, and she's got my collector gene. And so she is just plugged into manga in a really cool way that I love because she's a reader and she's getting all the same benefits I got from reading comics. Like her teachers would always tell us, how does she have this vocabulary? Like she knows what words and concepts mean. We're like, oh, it's manga. She's like, they're like I remember her like 5th grade teacher was like, why does Parker know who the Yakuza are? and I was like, oh, sorry about that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, sorry, a lot of manga. But but it's that same thing, the building in of reading. Did your kids latch on at all to that?
Not manga, and actually that's one of my big spots where I never got into that myself. So that's I plan to rectify that at some point. But I also have a huge backlog of things to read.
Oh yeah.
But you mentioned Raina Telgemeier, and yeah, definitely Smile and Guts and some other books along what was it, the Babysitter's Club, that she did a few of those as well. Yep. My daughter Maddie really got into that stuff, and she's not as big of a reader as it sounds like your kid is, but she really loves the art, that aspect of comic books. What is art? And and now she's getting into cosplaying and making her own outfits. And
that's awesome.
So yeah, it's I haven't been successful at passing on my love or the same kind of love that I have for comics. She's developed her own interest in them, and I still buy her books that I think she'll be interested in, or I'll show her things that, based on, I know you like this kind of art. This is what's in this comic book. Are you interested in reading this? And 9.9 times out of 10, she'll say yes. So I have to go buy her that book too.
That's awesome. I love the con element because my daughter and I go to Arizona has Phoenix Fan Fusion every year, and we go every year. It's a tradition for us. And the first year we went, she was pretty young, but loved it. And then ever since, same thing, cosplaying and, which costume am I going to go in? I'm going to meet friends. They're going to be in a costume, and it's just awesome. Like, it's such a great, moment as a parent when you're like, cool, you're dressed as Cloud from Final Fantasy VII, which came out years before you were born. But that's awesome. Go hook up with your friend Sephiroth and, go out and play. Like, it's awesome. Yeah. I love that element.
I know. I feel kind of robbed because, I always wanted to dress up, as my favorite superhero, but there was nothing for me to do that at except for Halloween.
Yeah. Yep.
And so I even put together once, my own designed Robin costume because Robin at that time, awesome. From New Teen Titans was my favorite character. Still kind of is, but.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's funny. Do you, I think this might be generational. I don't know, but Dick Grayson is maybe my favorite character of all time.
Same. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's, and I'm not covering any new ground here because I know people have said this before that he's like the ultimate older brother, right? Like, he's got all the kind of traits you want, but it is really interesting to me that our pocket, our sort of age group of collectors, it must have been the Wolfman Perez Teen Titans run because Robin is really the main character in that book for so much of it. But he is absolutely like top 3 for me. And when I think about, characters I love and great stories and like, silly things where I'm like, what's a character I'd want to meet? Or, who would I be like, oh, Dick Grayson. Yeah. Like big time. Yeah. That's funny. Yeah. I love that character.
Okay. So let's, before we transition, because I want to talk about your current podcast and some other podcasting things.
Sure.
What are some of your favorite things that you're reading right now?
Oh gosh. It's a great question. It's such a loaded question. So I said this earlier, I'm a total Tom King apologist, but there's something about his work. There's a brokenness in his work that he's trying desperately to heal. Like there's an old wound in his work that he's trying to process through writing. And I am right there. Like it is right in my pocket. Whatever. And, for him, I think he's talked about it's like PTSD because he served in the Middle East after 9/11, but obviously I do not have that same experience in any way. I'm not trying to claim I do, but there is something about his writing that is so vulnerable and so trying to find a way to healing. And those paths to healing can lead to some really weird and sometimes unhealthy places. And that sings to me. So I'm reading his Wonder Woman run right now with Daniel St. Pierre on art is phenomenal. Are you reading it?
Oh, yes. I every time I open up the DC, because I'm reading it on the DC app, I'm hoping that there's another new issue for me to read. So in fact, yesterday, I recorded one of my Reading Pile episodes and talked about Wonder Woman. I think it was 18.
Yeah.
And I had like 7 or 8 things I wanted to say about that because there was so many good elements, just within that issue. But then, it's not just Tom King, right? It's Sampere.
Yeah.
So that combination, and that's the thing I love about, forgive the aside, that's the thing I love about Tom King is that either by design or by providence, he has been able to pair up with these phenomenal artists who tell these stories. I just read Helena Windhorn. And, Bill Keith-Sevely is just beautiful, beautiful art. But yeah, I totally agree with you on what King is doing there with his various works.
It's funny because like many collectors, I swing between companies, but like, I'm buying more Marvel right now or I'm buying more DC. And I was all in on the Krakoa era X-Men, Jonathan Hickman. Everything. I loved it. I loved the conceit. I loved what it did to that universe. So I was buying a lot of Marvel. And once that ended, I found myself kind of looking over at DC, and DC has done this All In initiative recently. And it's like another kind of rebirth of it for DC. Like all of a sudden, where I just hadn't been collecting a lot of DC for a while. Now Superman's the best it's been, I don't know, in maybe since Death of Superman and Reign of the Superman.
Ooh.
It is phenomenal. I mean, Joshua Williamson is writing it. It's phenomenal. Mark Waid is going to be doing that Superboy book, which is going to be great. They even bring in Dan Slott over. I love that. I love Dan Slott. I think the Superman books are the best they've been in years. The Batman books, every third book from DC's Batman. So, if you don't like one, you can try another. There's a million to choose from. But like Batman Dark Patterns, if you're reading that miniseries, is so good by Dan Watters. He's an up and comer. Like in the 90s, he would have been a Vertigo guy. His writing's really dark. There's a Lovecraftian undercurrent to his work that pairs really well with Batman. It's really good. And then obviously King's Wonder Woman's great, but like Jeremy Adams is one of my favorite writers. He did a Wally West Flash run that was brilliant. And he's writing Aquaman. And don't tell Rob at the network I said this, but I'm not normally a huge Aquaman fan. But I love his Aquaman book. I'm reading that. So I'm reading a ton of DC. I'm really excited about the JSA book that's out right now by Jeff Lemire. There's just so much good. There's so many good comics. If I had to give, if somebody's listening and they're like one recommendation, the book that hooked me the most recently that I've been obsessed with, and it just wrapped, was The Deviant from Image by James Tynion IV. And I'm unfortunately blanking on the artist's name. I'll look it up. But it's a 9-issue series. It's self-contained, and it's a murder mystery with kind of a larger commentary on what it means to be queer in the legal system. That's not a huge part of it. It's not inherently a political book. It is really about this mystery that you really, really desperately want to find out. Oh, Joshua Hickson is the artist. It is such an amazing book, and mark my words, it will be a movie in the next 5 years. So go buy it now before the issues are crazy and outpriced, but it is amazing. And James Tynion, I think, is one of the best writers of this era.
Yeah, Tynion is one of those writers for me. It was like, I see some really good stuff, but I haven't quite gone onto the train with him. But you giving me that recommendation about Deviant, I definitely will check that out. I know I've seen it in previews.
Yeah.
But for some reason I passed on getting it, but I will add that to my to read list for sure.
The other book, and I cannot sorry, I'm just like hopped up because I feel like I literally feel like I'm recommending Sandman to somebody, or I feel like I'm recommending Animal Man by Morrison. Nice House on the Lake.
Oh yeah.
By Tynion and Alvarez Bueno. That book should be studied in college. Like that book should be in every creative writing curricula. It is, in my mind, maybe the best thing produced in comics in 20 years. Wow. I think it's phenomenal. Yeah, it's one of the most brilliant things I've ever read.
I would agree. Nice House by the Lake I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
I'm not so keen on the sequel.
Yeah, I wish there hadn't been. I'll be really honest with you. I wish it had just ended. Mm-hmm. Had it just ended, I think it's the Watchmen of the 21st century. But because he continues it, I like you. I've lost some momentum with Nice House by the Sea, but Nice House by the Lake is so good.
I think I agree with you. That is something that should be studied.
Yeah,
in the future. So, all right. Let's switch to talk about some podcasting stuff. I don't know that I know this about you, Sean. What got you into podcasting? Why did you want to be a podcaster? Why did you want to talk about comics in this way?
So this is such a dumb origin story. I wish I had some cool, like I love the reason why I collect comics. Like it's really emotionally important to me and all that stuff. Podcasting is completely different. So I've been friends with my friend Gotham, and I have known each other for a long time. And we actually went to high school together. And Gotham is Dr. G. So he, interestingly, my best friend from high school, his little brother is Gotham's best friend from high school. So we used to see each other at the house, we'd all go over to their house, we'd hang out. And I didn't really know Gotham well in high school because he was a couple of years younger. But I was friendly with him and everything. And then like we didn't really have much contact. Just we'd see each other at like, common parties with the two friends or whatever. And then out of the blue as adults, like in our 30s, we all ended up at a party together again. And all of a sudden, Gotham and I realized we had all this stuff in common, D&D and comics and role-playing games and stuff. And Gotham was like, hey, let's hang out. And we had this other friend, Alex, and the three of us would just hang out. And we would like literally it was like a Kevin Smith movie. Like we would just go to like dinner together, and the entire dinner would be like 3 hours of us talking about everything from like, Rick Hunter and Macross Saga from Robotech, to Courtney Cox and Misfits of Science, like just a huge array of nerddom. And so at one point, Gotham comes to me and he goes, hey, I'm thinking of starting a podcast. And I literally went, I don't know what that is. Like I didn't know what podcasts were.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, oh, it's this thing where, people talk about a topic. I go, oh, you mean the radio? And he's like, yeah, but it's recorded and you can listen to it, whatever. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And he's like, look, don't worry about it. It's basically our hangouts anyway. I'm just going to record them. And I was like, whatever, dude. Like, I don't. And so I just went over to his house and he like puts this mic in between us, and after making some phallus jokes, I'm like, and he's like, okay, I'm going to turn this on. And I'm like, all right, whatever, dude. I don't know what's happening. He records our conversation. And then out of the blue, he starts this network and he, he's like, oh, hey, our podcast came out. And I'm like, our what? And I listened to it and I was like, what the hell, dude? I didn't know you were recording me. And he's like, there was a microphone in between us. He's like, I literally said I'm recording now. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know it would be out, And so I just thought it was funny. And mostly, I would say the first year of it was me just wanting to hang out with my friend. And it was the way we hung out anyway. And if it also was something he wanted to do, I was like, cool, like that's awesome. And then I got the bug when he said to me, hey, we're not the only ones doing this. In fact, we're kind of late to the party. There's all these other comic book podcasts. And I was like, what? And then he introduced me to, all these different, I think my first podcast was Secret Origins, Ryan Daly. And he's like, hey, there's this, really cool one you might like. And that led me to and then next thing I know, I literally don't listen to music or the radio anymore. I only listen to podcasts. And that's when I start taking it more seriously, because where for the first year it was just hanging out with Gotham, all of a sudden I was like, man, people are putting like real thought and like effort and time into this. If I'm going to do this, I should do the same. And then eventually it just became something I love. And I'm sure it's the same for you. Well, I love getting to talk comics. And I love getting like, it adds a new layer to the hobby, right? It's a really isolated hobby. It's a really lonely hobby. And this adds such a fun communal element to it that had never been there before, which I love. This is my favorite part. Like you and I talking right now is my favorite part, right? Like this is like, I love podcasting as an excuse to just connect with really awesome people who love the things you love. So that's why I've stayed in it as long as I have. I'm sure, is it kind of the same for you?
Oh yeah. Yeah. The connections I've made over the years with people, it's weird, but it's cool at the same time because, I'm talking to people that are in different states or even different countries.
Continents. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, what an amazing opportunity podcasting has given, comic book fans like us, or insert your particular hobby. You can find podcasts about anything, and like Gotham said, there's a bajillion comic book podcasts out there, and even though I'm like this teeny tiny little fish in a huge ocean, I still do it because I love talking about the comics. But then on some occasions, I get to talk to people like you and have these wonderful conversations about comics and other things as well. So it's just been so much fun. And that's why I keep doing it too. It's just like, because at one point I was like, you're in your 50s now. At what point do you stop doing this? Because, who wants to listen to a 65-year-old talk about Amazing Spider-Man 121? Yeah, I do. Right?
Literally, I do. Yeah.
I think it is. Yeah. I think it's the people of our generation who, they want the same thing that I want, which is to talk about it and also to have those connections. So yeah, it's been wonderful. And you have had such a great range of things that you've talked about. Like we talked about the podcast that you've done on the Pulp to Pixel network. And then you were co-host. I'm sure there are other things that I've missed, like I said, you're co-host of the Bat Pod. Am I wrong though? You took a hiatus from podcasting for a little bit, right? Is that right?
Yeah. So I started podcasting, I think I think Gotham and I, our first show was like 2014 or 2015. So it's been a while. Even again, late to the party compared to like you or to like Michael Bailey or some of the people who've been podcasting forever, but still, kind of in that maybe second wave of comic book podcasters. And I was going along and I was co-hosting the podcast with Bat Pod with Bill Beer, and Greg and I had our shows on Pulp to Pixel, and everything was going really well. And then, not to get too heavy, but my daughter has a medical condition, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Mm-hmm. And it's not very well understood condition, and it's a condition of exclusion. Like you have to exclude a million other things before you get to like, oh, this is actually what it is. And so we started on this medical journey about 2 years ago, and the range of it, and as a parent, you'll understand, like at one point we were doing biopsies, like it got like that heavy. Right. And so at a certain point I was like, oh, I can't.
Oh yeah.
I have no mental, emotional, or physical space for anything but this, right? And so I just had to, end my podcasting and Bill, the host of the Bat Pod, Bill was super sweet. Of course, he's a great guy about it. I was like, hey, he's like, oh my God, yeah, obviously your kid comes first, and so I just took a hiatus that I thought would be maybe 6 months. I was like, oh, I'll take a little time away, and it took 2 years to get to a diagnosis. And then it took a little less than 2 years to get to a diagnosis, but it took 2 years to get to diagnosis and our version of stability. Mm-hmm. And so anybody out there who lives, with somebody with a chronic condition, or especially a child with a chronic illness, your life just changes, right? Like your life becomes shaped by the condition in a way, at first in a way that's sad, because you start sort of checking off the all these different dreams you had or assumptions you made about the future. And then you start kind of getting to a place of acceptance. And then you get to a place of hope where you're like, oh, like whatever, like, yeah, some of those other dream things are gone, but there's still a million other great things. Like, what am I doing? My kid's alive, and my kid is, like there's, you go through the whole arc, right? The Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, you go through the 5-step program, and you get to acceptance. And eventually what happened for me, and I think this is what happens for a lot of people who have family members with serious medical conditions, is you say, for the good of my kid, for my ability to be able to show up for her, I need to nurture myself a bit too. Like I need to, and comic books were great. Like, again, comic books never let me down, man. They carried me through those 2 years, but I missed this, and I missed my life not being defined by doctor's visits, and my kid missed that. And so the more I was willing to branch out again in podcast, the more also we were like getting her out more. And like, just it all kind of coalesced at the same time. And then this is actually all thanks to Shag from the Fire and Water Network. He's just the nicest person. I loathe to think he'll listen to this, but he's the nicest person. He's this connector who just loves bringing people in and together and connecting people. And he's this unbelievable force for joy. And I've known Shag for a number of years through podcasting, and he had guested on my show. I've been a guest on a bunch of his shows, and I guested on a ton of Fire and Water podcast network shows. In fact, the other founder of the network, it's Shag and Rob Kelly. He jokingly had an award called the Robbie if you had been on 5 or more of his shows, and I was the first Robbie recipient because I had been on like 7 of his shows. And so I just had always been plugged into those guys, and they were always great. And Shag had asked me to guest on one of his shows, and it was the first podcast I had done in like 2 years. And as we were just chatting, he was like, hey, he's like, I miss you. He's like, he's like, I miss your voice. He's like, I miss your shows. He's like, any chance of you coming back? And I go, it's funny that you say that. He knew why I had taken the hiatus. I go, but we've gotten to this point of some stability, and I am actually thinking of starting another show. And he's like, oh, you're going to do it with Gotham on the Pulp to Pixel network? And I go, no, Gotham's kind of moved on to some other stuff. I'm like, I think I'm just going to start my own thing. And he's like, oh, don't do that. He's like, join the Fire and Water network. And I was like, oh, haha. And he was like, no, join the network. He's like, and he goes, I've offered before. And he had, but I was always like, oh, that was nice of him to, he's joke, or, he's just being nice, and he's like, you're on all our shows. All the guys on the network love you. He's like, just, and I was like, okay. I'm like, you're being really nice. I'm like, I'm like, I'll send you a couple of ideas. Take them to the guys on the network. I won't be offended when you say no. I still love you all. Everything's good. And he kind of laughed, and then he just called me the next day, and he was like, yeah, you're in. And I was like, oh my God, this is so great. So just out of the blue, not only was I able to return to podcasting, but I was able to join this network of folks that I love and whose shows I love, and who I've just known for years podcasting and have just always been great. Like, I've met Shag in person a couple times. I've met Rob in person, and it was just this really cool confluence. Everything just kind of came together, and so I feel very fortunate, and I feel very fortunate that everybody in our community is so supportive and sweet. I mean, I'll tell you, not to get too sentimental, but the outpouring of folks when I came back and like was releasing a show, the outpouring of folks, actually where it crystallizes, you were part of this, is I knew I was going to do this show about the Perez written and drawn issues of Wonder Woman. So I mapped out, I did a little Excel spreadsheet for it's like the first 24 issues plus a couple of annuals. And I was like, oh, I'll just reach out to the community and see who wants to guest with me. And I was convinced that it would be like a couple of people I happen to know better than others, right? It would be Clinton Robinson, and it would be, Shag or Greg, a couple of folks, and that I was just going to be begging for guests. And I was fine with that because I was like, I've been gone a long time, whatever. And I was actually really moved. I mean, I got kind of choked up because I sent the spreadsheet out to you, to a bunch of people who I really respect and who I hadn't been able to record with before, or people I've been in touch with online. And within 24 hours, that list filled. And I was like, oh my God. Like I was just really, and I still am actually very, very, very moved by that because, you hope people like what you do. And just to have this be the show that came out of this really dark time in my life with this illness with my daughter, and to have people be so loving and welcoming is you just don't, you can't take that stuff for granted. Sorry, I know I didn't mean to get so heavy.
No. I like I said, I had no idea. I got a sense that you were on hiatus because I have been listening to past shows, and then whenever I see you on somebody else's show, I listen to that. And then I got that, I think you may have mentioned that on something that you'd been gone for a while, but I didn't know. And so, that's amazing that, first of all, I'm so glad to hear that your daughter is on a mending path. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, obviously, that you're in a place where you can come back. And I will say too, when you reached out to me about the podcast we're going to talk about here in a second, I immediately went to go sign up because I knew those slots were going to fill up, and I wanted to make sure to pick out an issue that I wanted to explore with you. So yeah, I had no had no thoughts of I could take my time. I could get to this next week. No, it was that very minute. As soon as I got your message, I was like, oh, I got to do this.
That was really nice of you. I did not think that was going to happen at all. So I was very moved, and then also the fun of it is now just getting to record with folks I have recorded with before and I haven't recorded with before, which is awesome.
So we talked around it. So this Wonder Woman podcast that you have released 8 episodes so far at the time that we're recording, plus the intro, the promo for it. So it is called Peace Bound and Down. And you are, like I said, at the top of the show, you're talking about the George Perez 1987. So was this your idea to do this when you and Shag were talking about joining the network? Yeah,
absolutely. The beauty of that network, and those guys are so awesome and so welcoming, is they don't dictate anything. Like they like literally the only thing they ask is don't pod fade. You know, if you're going to start a show, keep it going. And which, is a perfectly fine request. So they just said like, hey, send us some ideas. And I had really 4 kind of big ones, one of which I am going to still do on the network coming up. I'm kind of putting it together and I'll announce it somewhat soon. But it's kind of like, oh, what do I want to cover? What do I want to cover? And Shag and I and some of the other guys were just talking, and they're like, well, what are you reading right now? Like, what are you loving? And I'm like, oh, it's always Perez for me. Like I think George Perez is the greatest artist of the 20th century. Like, not comic book artist. I think he's the greatest artist of the 20th century. I literally wept the day he died. Like, he is, my guy. Like, I mean, I'm not on a limb here. It's the same for a lot of people, but he is my favorite comic book artist. He is, and the thing I love about Perez the most is his tenderness, like his ability to emote. He could draw he draws action like nobody, right? He draws the best crowd scenes. He draws, the man drew Crisis. He drew every character in the DC universe. He does everything beautifully, but his ability to emote, the Perez eyes, are always, and like, right, I don't even have to say anything. I don't even have to refer to a specific panel. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And his ability to emote makes his comic book so much more emotionally powerful for me. And so I thought about, I want to do something with Perez. And, I was like, I don't want to do Titans because the Tighten Up the Defense guys, those guys are awesome. And I'm not going to do anything as fun as they're doing. And then I was like, oh, I don't really want to do his Busiek Avengers run right now because Gotham and I had done a Astro City podcast. So I covered a lot of Busiek and I love Busiek, and so I was like, God, you know what I haven't reread in a really long time? I was like, is his Wonder Woman run. And I was like, I wonder if, and I read along with the show, but I read the first issue, ahead of time just to see if this is, and I was like, oh my God, yeah, I'm fully in. I want to do this. So anyway, I sent, 4 sort of ideas to them. Any 4 of them I could have done. But one of the pieces of advice I did get from them is, hey, indexing shows tend to do better. They're like, we don't know why. They're like, even though non-indexing shows are sometimes more fun for the podcaster because you're not as beholden, right, one issue to the next, indexing shows just tend to do better. And I was like, oh, actually, that was kind of my experience with Pulp to Pixel too. Like, our Secret Wars shows did really, really well. Squadron Supreme did really well. And even though Neverending Reading Pile did well, it didn't have the same listenership as the others, and so I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So yeah, I just doubled down on Wonder Woman. And then, as I'm sure you've have the same experience, once you start podcasting about a book, it almost becomes yours. Like not like territorially, but like just like I'm like the go-to Wonder Woman guy now, which I just never thought I would be. Like, Paul Ken on the network is doing DC Special Cast, which I love. It's a fun show about those DC giant-sized DC books from the late 70s. And there's one about Wonder Woman, Earth 2 Wonder Woman. And he like immediately reached out to me. He's like, oh, you're the Wonder Woman guy. Let's do this episode together. And I'm like, I'm the Wonder Woman guy? Like, I'll be the Perez guy. I'm like, I don't know if I'm the one. But now all of a sudden I'm becoming the Wonder Woman guy. So I'm finding myself immersed in Wonder Woman and the love of the character. And so I'm sure you have the same experience with the Legion and with, and it's just, yeah, I'm super excited about it. And it has opened up a love for this character for me that I had, but it's expanded on it. And then I think for me, the piece that's, and there are like segments in the podcast that we'll talk about in a second that I love, but as far as the character goes, for me, the part that that resonates right now is the world is so crazy right now. And, politically, and it's such a scary place to be raising a kid. It's a scary place to be alive. And to have like Diana be this like constant through line of like love, compassion, and truth, I'm like, yep, I'm all in. And this is the perfect timing for it.
Yeah, that is one of the many things about Peacebound and Down that I absolutely love, is that you focus on those aspects. And then you have a series of questions that you ask your hosts as well that kind of go along with that to some degree. And it is wonderful to hear you and your guest co-host talking about Wonder Woman in that way. But it's also very easy to do so because of the way that George Perez,
oh yeah,
and everybody else that worked on the book set it up and shepherded that character through that story at that time. And yeah, I will just reiterate what you said, about George Perez being, the greatest artist of all time.
He's amazing. And he's just amazing.
I like you. I don't tend to get too emotional, or at least I didn't until I got into my 50s. But too emotional about people, superstars. I'll just say, whether they're actors or comic book creators or whatever. But man, same. When George Perez died, I was very sad. I may have had a few tears as well.
Yeah,
just because how much his work meant to me, and growing up reading New Teen Titans especially, but then Wonder Woman, and then of course Crisis. There's just everything he does. It was just so well done and constructed and beautiful.
Yeah, his work it's just without par. I mean, it's amazing, and and the fun of the show, the thing that I really love is getting to cover a comic book I love, which is great. But I very purposely also built in a couple segments that are really guest focused. There's the Lasso of Truth, where you have to grab the lasso and tell some silly truth about yourself, and that has ended up being, I mean, just the most recent episode covered issue 6 of the Perez run with Dr. Ange. And Dr. Ange tells a story about taking a calculus class for a girl he was trying to hit. Basically, he wanted to date, and she suckers him into taking a calculus class in her place. It is the funniest damn thing I've ever heard. It's like a John Hughes movie. It's literally my favorite moment in my podcasting history. He's telling the story, and I'm dying laughing. It's the funniest thing. And so just those moments too of like I wanted to craft a show. I mean, you're really, really the gold standard on this, but I wanted to craft a show where not only did we talk about comics, but it was a chance to give some, personal connection too, so that people got to know the guest better, and the guest felt like they had really, it just came out of a great conversation. And so yeah, I love that piece of it. It actually has become my absolute favorite part of the show. Is I love covering the issues, but I always look forward to what is the person going to bring for Lasso of Truth? And we always end the show with how would you bring peace to man's world? And I'm always oh, what are people going to say? So that's just a blast. I actually asked them to not tell me ahead of time because I want to be caught off guard, and it's a lot of fun.
Oh, I was wondering if you both knew what we were going to talk about regarding those questions. So that makes it even better to me.
Yeah.
that it's done that way. And I will tell you, I agree. It's fun to hear you guys talk about the issues. But yeah, the answers to those questions that you both provide are just delightful. And you learn so much more about the person, each of you. And I play the game. It's oh, well, my answer would be this.
I mean, you're going to have to do it soon. So yeah, you're coming up soon. You're going to have to answer those questions. So
I got to start thinking then. Well, speaking of questions, why Peace Bound and Down?
This is another one of those. I wish I had a thoughtful answer to this. I was trying to think about what I wanted to call it, a Wonder Woman podcast. And the sane thing would have been Wondercast or Wonder Woman cast. Just the conceit should be in the name. You're not supposed to do what I did. You're not supposed to name it something clever, which is dumb because then people don't know what it is. And so I was trying to think of names, and that Smokey and the Bandit song,
yes,
Eastbound and Down, and I was watching Eastbound and Down with Danny McBride, and I was oh my God, and in Wonder Woman, for maybe people who don't know the wide history, the William Moulton Marston, when he created her in the 40s. Every episode, every issue, she is bound. She is literally bound. And if she's bound by a man pre-crisis, then she loses her powers. And there's all this sexual undertone to it. But there's also a lot of women's lib undertone to it, because every depiction of her being bound in that era, there's a depiction of her breaking those chains, which, So anyway, that was really resonant to me. So I'm Peace, Bound, and Down being she's, kind of fighting against. So I was I just came up with it, and I loved it. I thought it was the cleverest thing. I was stupidly patting myself on the back, and the Fire and Water guys all thought it was hilarious. And we released the show, and the first I don't know, the 21st questions I get from people, around the world. Martin Gray from Scotland, first of all, is like, what the hell is Peacebound and Down? This doesn't make any sense. Like, it's so funny. I've had a lot of people who don't get, either are younger than Smokey and the Bandit or aren't from America, who are like, your title makes no sense. Like, what? And so I now am like the point where I'm like, well, I'm living with it. And I love it. I think it's really funny. Mm-hmm. But I, in a different world, probably would have made a smarter choice.
Well, yeah. And part of the reason I wanted to ask is for me, that's exactly where my brain went is Eastbound and Down, because I watched all those movies. And also, I don't know if you know this, but George Hanna, who currently does the Meanwhile the podcast show, he had another show before that called the George and Tony Entertainment Show. And that was their theme song.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so at the end of every episode, they would play that. And
yep.
and then you came out with Peacebound and Down. I'm like, oh, is it connected? It's got to be connected, right?
Well, and the plan originally was that was going to be the theme song for the show.
Oh, okay.
But in talking to, prior to this show, I was on, Pulp to Pixel. I was on, all these like smaller networks where we weren't really thinking about like Spotify or anything like that. Mm. But the Fire and Water guys have their act so together that one of the first things they said to me is like, hey, you probably don't want to use, anything that's got a copyright on it because you'll get kicked out of Spotify. So I was like, oh, so then that also made it a little more obscure because otherwise it would have been pretty obvious. But yeah, that was going to be the plan because I was like, that song was in my head. So yeah, very silly. I know it's totally silly, but.
I also want to say, the first couple episodes that you put out, I'm so sorry, I've forgotten the name of the guests on those first
Dr.
two.
Anna Papard.
Okay.
She's a doctor from Brock University, Media Cultures Studies in Canada. And then Dr. Ange, who is actually a medical doctor. He's actually a medical doctor. And he's a guest on a lot of Fire and Water shows. He's amazing. Yeah.
So yeah, that first episode with the first doctor,
uh-huh.
You approached it approached Wonder Woman in a much more academic sense, I'll say. And I love that episode so much. Because you could have just as easily just started with issue 1, right? And then episode 2 is issue 2, just like Peter and I have done on the Legion Project. But you stepped back and talked about Wonder Woman as a concept, as a whole, and what she means and what she has meant over the years. And I just thought it was brilliant to do that. And then the second episode, correct me if I'm wrong, you talked about the end of Wonder Woman Volume 1. Mm-hmm. The lead up to George Perez's Wonder Woman. And I thought that was another great way to transition into the first issue, which is episode 3, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
The numbering gets wonky. You're right. It again, decisions, right? The decisions we make. It would make much more sense if episode 1 was issue 1. But I felt really, I knew Dr. Papard. She was one of 3 co-hosts on a podcast, amazing podcast called Oh Gosh, Oh Golly, Oh Wow, which covered Marvel's Excalibur run. And all 3 hosts are PhDs in like media studies.
Wow.
And one of them in particular, Dr. Andrew DeMann, is the guy behind the Claremont run on Twitter. If you don't follow them, you should. It's a handle called the Claremont run, and they do deep studies into X-Men issues and X-Men questions, and it's brilliant. It's some of the best like kind of academia in comics out there. And he teaches, I think, at maybe Ball State. I don't remember exactly where he teaches. And then the third host, Dr. Chris Maverick, is actually going to be on an episode of Peacebound and Down coming up soon. So I loved that show. I caught it really early because I recognized the Oh Gosh, Oh Golly, Oh Wow tagline from Excalibur. I was a big Excalibur fan. So I kind of started reaching out to them early, like, oh, hey, fun show. And I think Anna emailed me back like, oh, you're literally the first person who's emailed us about the show. We didn't know anybody was listening. This is, how nice. And I was like, hey, if you need any guests, I'm like, I'm not a PhD, but I am a teacher. I'm like, and I'm, something of a comic, I have a deep comic knowledge. So I ended up guesting on an episode and it was so much fun. And so I just kind of kept in touch with them, online. And so when I knew I was doing this podcast, there were just a couple of things at play. One, I'm a middle-aged guy, doing a podcast about the preeminent female character in comic book history. One of the preeminent female characters in history of the world, right? And I am definitely going to dive into the issues presented in the comic, and because Perez and Len Wein don't shy away from issues of, feminism and other sort of political concepts. I'm like, but I don't feel like I should be the first voice heard on this. And I feel like I need a table setting episode. And I first immediately thought of Anna because I knew she taught a sort of comics and culture. She teaches a couple of those courses, but in particular, I knew she taught about Wonder Woman. And so I reached out to her. She was incredibly kind, incredibly giving of her time. And that episode is so fun because, one, it's the first episode. So, you're always a little nervous on the first episode of a new show you're starting. And two, I had not really podcasted in 2 years. So I was already also a little rusty. But I made the choice, and I'm so glad I did. I hope it comes across this way. I made the choice to just lay out. Like, I'm going to just basically ask Anna a question, and then I'm just going to sit back because she is a font of knowledge. And that episode, I was fascinated by everything she had to say. I think she's brilliant. And the response to the episode was really, really affirming because people reached out, and I appreciate the same thing, your commentary. People reached out and just said like, wow, that's a really cool way to start the show. Like this very academic look at Wonder Woman's place in culture. In fact, we called the episode Who is Wonder Woman? And it's, her place in culture. She's on the cover of Ms. Magazine, #1, Gloria Steinem in the 70s. And, there's all these amazing sort of interactions with culture as a whole. And so I loved that episode. But then I also loved the silliness of following that up with Dr. Ange and I talking about Volume 1, 329, Crisis 12, Legend 6, which is her, death and rebirth, and then kicking off into the comic book place. We're going to do more of those culture episodes. I've got Dr. Jennifer Schwartz-Levine lined up. I've got a couple of other folks lined up. So those are going to kind of punctuate the show, which I'm really excited about. So I'm glad you liked it. There's more of those kind of coming.
I'm so glad to hear you say that because, I as much as I love what Dr. Papard was saying, I'm sure there's so much more to get into as well, especially as the series goes on. So, that's brilliant. Wonderful job that you and your guest hosts have done. I'm definitely a fan. I'm looking forward to more episodes in the future. I've been doing my read along as well. I'm finally caught up. Well, I have surpassed which episode you've released so far, but I just read issue 12 not too long ago. To maybe do something with that in the near future. Yeah.
I'm glad you're prepped. I actually read along with the show. I only read the issue in prep for the episode, just to kind of make it as fresh as possible. But it's hard because I do want to keep reading. The books are so good. I'm like, I want to keep going, but I'm like, nope. I'm going to stick to this paradigm. So yeah,
that's exactly what I do with the Legion Project.
Yep.
I don't want to get too far ahead and have things kind of swirling around in your mind as you're focusing on the one particular issue. I think that's a good choice.
It's funny, sorry, just a really quick aside when you mentioned Legion Project again. When we were talking at the very beginning of the episode and I was saying that I'm a Giffen, Lytle, LaRoque guy, all of a sudden I was like, oh wait, no, you hate LaRoque. I was like, oh, I forgot about this. I was like, I all of a sudden I totally made a face and I was like, oh no, what are you doing? The big through line in that show is oh, LaRoque just isn't good enough. He's not cutting it. And I love LaRoque on Flash. He's my Wally West Flash artist, and he grew a lot, between those books. But it's just, it just reminded me all of a sudden that I was like, oh, I'm a big Greg LaRoque guy. And you're like, dude, I've literally spent 80 hours talking about how he was not a good enough artist for the Legion. So it was funny.
He was fine. I wouldn't say I hate him, but he was fine.
Yeah. No, he's early in his career. So yeah.
Yeah. Very, very true. Very true. Okay. Is there anything else you want to say about Peacebound and Down?
No, just, it's a fun show. It's, the conceit of the show is that I cover great runs of Wonder Woman. So I'm starting with the Perez written and drawn issues, which is 1 through 24, and then 2 annuals. And then I'm going to cover Action Comics 600 as well, the crossover Wonder Woman and Superman. That'll be a really fun episode. So there's a definitive number of those episodes for the Perez run. I may in the future circle back and do the rest of the Perez run, but one of the things I purposely am trying to set up with the show is that I can jump to other Wonder Woman runs, right? So the Greg Rucka run is great, the Phil Jimenez run is great, Tom King's run is great. So, so anyway, while I love the Perez run, it's going to be a confined space at first.
Okay. That's even better news because I whenever I find a podcast that I love and, like you say, index shows are good. Maybe I should consider doing something like that besides the Legion Project, but I was not aware that you were going to do other runs, as well. So that is great news because I've read a few of those. Well, the three, all of them. I've read all of those so far. So yeah, I'll be reading along as well.
That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm excited because I like the indexing format, but I wanted some freedom within the indexing format. So I kind of have been really specific about the Perez written and drawn issues of Wonder Woman, because he stops drawing it at 24. So
right.
I might do 25 because it kind of capstones that story, but either way, yeah, I'll be jumping off at that point.
All right. Well, I do have one more question for you.
Yeah.
Well, maybe more than one. But one of the things that I love about some of your other shows that you do is you have secret questions.
Yeah.
For your companion. I have a secret question for you.
Oh, that's awesome.
What is the origin of the secret question?
Great question. Very meta. Very meta. Yeah. And again, this community is so small and wonderful, right? But we all kind of get known for our things, and like again, when I want like a deep dive into my favorite comics, like those Legion books, like you and Peter, like I'm like, oh, I need like an in-depth look at like the Universo project, and like there are like certain things that people are known for. I didn't know this was going to be my thing, but apparently secret questions, people are funny because they'll be like, oh yeah, I stole this from Sean, or oh, Sean's, and I'm like, I didn't. Okay, cool. Where it came from is Gotham and I, and then Greg and I really picked up on it in the Secret Wars podcasts. It was just a chance to like keep each other on our toes. And it was a chance to allow the show to breathe a little bit by doing some sort of just quick diversion off the main topic to kind of keep everything fresh and keep everything moving. With Gotham and I, it was more just silly fun. We would do like one an episode. Greg and I had like a little bit of a competitive streak. And Greg is brilliant. Greg's brain is like frighteningly, it's like frighteningly amazing because the way it works is so unlike anybody I've ever met. But there's a moment where you're like, oh, if he ever turned to evil, like we would all be in a lot of trouble. Like he has this really weird brain. So he would ask these questions, and like where it's cemented for me is in Secret Wars 2, Boom Boom, that character from the X-Men, she's created in Secret Wars 2. People don't know this. I think it's issue 4 or 5. No, it's 5. And she's just this runaway, and she's like walking along the train tracks, and the Beyonder encounters her, and she's running away from an abusive home. And he's like, cool, go into space with me. And he like creates this car, and they go off to see the Celestials. And at one point, she has like a beer with the Celestials or something. Sounds way cooler than it is. But it's written by Jim Shooter, and Jim Shooter's famously from Pittsburgh. And so Greg goes off and researches like most popular beers in Pittsburgh. And apparently there is a beer, Iron City beer, that is made in Pittsburgh and is like super popular in Pittsburgh, but it's like the Natty Light of Pittsburgh beers. Like no, it's not a good beer, but it's, it's there, it's the Pabst, it's a PBR of beers. And so out of the blue, he's like, hey, Jim Shooter's my secret question is Jim Shooter's favorite beer is Iron City beer. He's like, do you have a local beer that you really love? And that just, it so broke my brain that he had done this bizarre tangent. And I loved it so much that we started like really trying to one up each other with like, and not in like a silly way or hopefully not an annoying way, but just in like a, hey, what's a clever, like, what could we bring to this issue? Part of it was also desperation because there was so little good to talk about in Secret Wars 2 issues that we were just looking for anything to kind of keep us sane. But I do love it because I invite guests in all my podcasts now, but in Peacebound and Down especially, I invite guests to bring secret questions. And it makes it really fun for me. And I'll give an example from the most recent episode as of this recording. We were covering issue 6. It was Dr. Ange. And Dr. Ange is amazing. He's a great guy, great guest. And there's a quote in issue 6 from Ozymandias, that poem, look upon my works, ye mighty, in despair. And Dr. Ange is like, hey, there's this famous quote from this Keats poem. What's your favorite poem? Or what's your favorite line from a poem? And I was like, whoa. And I like, such a cool question. And I'm an English major, so I love poetry. And it just got me. And then he was real, like, he loved my answer. And then he got really into it. And I think it's just a way to open the show up, to let it breathe, to bring in other elements to it. And then I also love that it lets the audience participate. Because as a listener, what my hope is that you're listening going, oh, my answer is this.
Yeah.
And you're talking back to the radio, or you're talking back to your headphones. And so, yeah, it's just a lot of fun. And it's just kind of weirdly become my thing. And so my favorite thing about it now is the guests bringing it, because, I love doing them, but I'll go a little crazy and I'll write like 10 for an episode. And then I'll just tell myself, oh, you can only use 2. And then I love the guests, because the guests always bring better questions than I do, which is awesome. So that's a fun question. I appreciate you having a secret question. And this is a weird thing for me to ask, but do you find yourself responding to the questions when you listen? Because that is my hope. Yeah.
Yeah. Anytime there's a question like that, whether it's a secret question or, just questions at all, like you do on Peacebound and Down, it's just fun. It's fun to participate. It's fun to ponder. Like sometimes I can't even come up with, on off the cuff what my answer would be. I have to think about it for a little bit, which is, I think, one of the brilliant things about it is that, you get that engagement, whether it's, direct to you or not.
No, I love it. It's fun. And again, the more, again, you're really, really brilliant at this. I feel like the more you get to interact with the guest as a conversation, and then the more you get to trigger the things that they like, and it triggers this, fun back and forth. I think it just comes across in the episode, right? It's like the more fun the hosts are having, the more fun the listener has. And so that, that's always part of it for me, is I just want the shows to be fun.
Same. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Sean, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me and the audience here. I just had so much fun. It's always great to have these conversations, which is why I want to do them. Like I said before, especially with someone whose skills I admire. Anyway, so I can't wait to hear more Wonder Woman podcasting. Wherever you happen to land at various shows, I am there with you. So it's just a lot of fun to hear you talk about comics. So before you get out of here, other people should be experiencing the love that I have for you as a podcaster. So how can they find your stuff? How can they interact with you?
Well, thank you. And again, thank you so much, one, for the kind words and for having me on the show. I feel the exact same way. I told you I was intimidated before we started recording, because I'm like, I've been listening to you for so long. And I felt the same way when I recorded. I was on DCOCD with Peter Rios. And there's just certain people where you're like, oh my God, I need to bring my A game. I'm a little intimidated here. But thank you so much for having me on the show. This is great. I love listening to your work. And this has just been such a blast. Again, we have never met in person, and here we have all these amazing connections, and this was a real treat. I'm so thankful for this. And so, yeah, if people are interested, they can find me Peacebound and Down, a Wonder Woman podcast. It's on the Fire and Water Podcast Network, along with a million other amazing shows by other hosts. The Secret Wars and Beyond podcast we talked about is on the Pulp to Pixel podcast network. No new shows on that network for a while, but I would recommend going back and listening to those Secret Wars podcasts. I think they're really good, especially the new Avengers lead up to Secret Wars 3. I think is some of the best work I've ever done. And then Squadron Supreme cast, also on that network, Never Ending Reading Pile. The Bat Pod with Bill Beer. I was a co-host on that for a couple of years. And but yeah, thank you so much again, man. This was awesome, and I can't wait for me to turn the tables and host you as a guest on an upcoming episode of Peacebound and Down.
Well, talk about intimidation. So anyway, all right. So if anybody has any feedback about this conversation, this great conversation that Sean has had with me, please email me at longboxreview@gmail.com. You can leave voicemail or text me at 208-953-1841 or contact me via social media at longboxreview. Thanks for listening, everybody, and I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.